Hello. I am Daniel and I welcome you in this module 3.4c. Positive discipline. And our learning objectives are: examine positive disciplinary techniques that benefit children's development. Positive discipline provides children with guidance and experiential learning opportunities to develop, grow, and be successful in their self-control and social interactions. It also ensures that children continue to receive affection from the adults, especially caregivers, in their lives. When practiced consistently, positive discipline helps children learn and thrive by supporting the emotional connection between caregivers and children that is necessary for healthy development. Discipline is teaching based on setting goals for learning, planning an approach, finding solutions that work, and is positive when it is sensitive to and respectful of children. Guidance means to lead or show someone the way to reach a goal. It should be provided with love and respect, helping children learn to regulate their emotions and control their behavior. What is the difference between discipline and punishment? Discipline. The process of teaching children about self-control, appropriate behaviors, and social interaction. Crucial for the development of social, emotional, and behavioral skills that children will need for the rest of their lives. Caregivers can use positive disciplinary techniques to set expectations for socially appropriate behavior, such as demonstrating respect toward one another and the environment. Caregivers can help children achieve growth by focusing on developing social skills, establishing friendships, respecting others, conflict resolution, and self-advocacy. It allows children and caregivers to view short-term challenges as opportunities to practice self-regulation, empathy, nonviolence, and respect. Punishment. Punishment operates by elevating children's physiological stress levels and reinforces patterns of brain activity, emotional responses, and inappropriate behaviors that caregivers hope to end. Long-term, negative effects of punishment can include aggression, decreased intellectual performance, lower caregiver-child attachment, anxiety, depression, and impaired development. Corporal punishment or physical punishment is highly discouraged and goes strictly against children's human rights. Physical punishment has multiple negative effects, including the development of aggressive, disruptive, delinquent, antisocial, violent behaviors, and an increased likelihood of violent victimization. Setting limits through positive discipline. In childcare settings, it is necessary to set limits in a respectful, caring way. When considering limit-setting techniques, it is important to keep in mind children's histories, their developmental levels, and, in the moment, their emotional states. Unstructured caregiving environments lacking guidelines and expectations can be frightening and uncomfortable for children, so caregivers must set limits using positive discipline techniques and uphold them for all children. Positive discipline supports learning, development, and identity formation in children through the growth of healthy attachments with their caregivers, who provide them with the security and trust that children need to explore, trust, and relate to others. Results of using positive discipline. Through positive discipline, children learn skills to respectfully interact with adults and peers, competence and confidence to deal with challenges throughout their lives, how to internalize limits and practice self-control and self-discipline, which allows them to take on more responsibilities as they grow, how to recognize and express their feelings, develop a sense of empathy, fairness, and altruism. Nonviolent techniques. Parents and caregivers can incorporate many nonviolent techniques, including listening to children, acknowledging appropriate behavior, expecting the best in children, ensuring physical and emotional safety, modeling desired behaviors, removing children from overstimulating or unmanageable situations. Children who are raised with nonviolent techniques tend to have higher academic success, display less aggression, hold higher social acceptance, have higher self-esteem, show more independence. Timeout and behavioral charts. Timeout. Timeout typically involves placing children who are misbehaving in isolation, usually in a chair or a corner of the room. This is considered a punitive practice that can cause anxiety and humiliation. Rather than using the moments to guide children through difficult feelings, it instead teaches them that love can be withdrawn and is conditional, for example, behave or else. Behavioral charts. Charts are used to demonstrate that children have completed certain tasks or behaved in a specific way. They are often used to reward behaviors that are seen as reasonable expectations, not for exceptional conduct. As a result, behavioral charts might detract from a child's innate motivation to do something good, and instead teaches them to value extrinsic rewards. A long-term consequence of having children behave just to please a caregiver or to get a reward is that they learn to be sneaky, because they know that they will be punished if they are caught. Although timeout and behavioral charts are commonly used in home and childcare settings, we do not recommend their use. Tips for implementing positive discipline. Maintain a mutually respectful relationship with children at all moments, especially during individual routine care. Listen and reflect on what children have said to ensure understanding. Use moments of one's frustration to model to the children how to cope with difficult feelings. Be empathetic with frustration, anger, etc. And maintain emotional and physical connectedness, including eye contact, while correcting a child's behavior with firm, respectful communication. Observe individual children regularly to identify triggers and moments in which they are more susceptible to having difficulties. Communicate reasonable expectations, fair limits, and achievable standards firmly and clearly in age or developmentally appropriate language. Ensure that all caregivers are consistent in expectations and follow through. Design spaces that help reinforce limits and promote positive, autonomous decision making. More tips for implementing positive discipline. Maintain consistent routines and structures, with thoughtful transitions. Be flexible. Adapt responses to each child and their temperaments. Show the child warmth and affection even when he or she misbehaves, for example, listen to them, see the situation from their point of view, avoid making threats. Clearly communicate potential consequences or results of making a different choice. Use difficult moments to teach a child about how they can do better the next time calmly and without aggression. Give the child positive attention in moments of success and calm. Help children express their feelings and wishes and to identify alternatives and solutions. Comfort and support children, especially when they are hurt, afraid, or facing challenging situations. Other techniques. Positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is a method of identifying to children which behaviors are acceptable and appropriate and which are not. Verbal recognition or validation from caregivers helps children feel recognized for their efforts to behave appropriately and encourages them to continue to strive to meet and exceed expectations. Caregivers should not overly praise a child for ordinary tasks, for example eating from their plate. Instead, they can mention their behavior indirectly to others or directly to the child. For example, Samuel did a great job putting toys away today, or I see you put the toys away when you finished, which is helping to keep the room clean for everyone. Caregivers should be careful to avoid comparing children, creating unfair expectations, and telling rather than showing them what to do. Other techniques. Limit setting. Setting limits can include children's involvement in designing rules or limits. This allows children to feel empowered, which helps create a stronger sense of community. It also helps prevent power struggles between caregivers and children, and lets children exercise their independence. Limits should always be predictable, reasonable, and achievable for the children and the group age-wise and developmentally. Explanations of limits and freedoms should be clear, understandable, and expressed positively, focusing on what children can do rather than what they cannot do. If children need support, Caregivers can present two options to them, which can help them feel less overwhelmed. These options should always be realistic and reach for the same end goal. For example, a caregiver can ask a child, "Do you want to have your diaper changed now or in 2 minutes?" This allows the child to feel a sense of control while still complying with the caregiver's wishes. Other techniques. Problem solving. Problem solving is where adults encourage children's participation in coming up with alternative solutions to challenges and evaluating the effects of those solutions. Through this practice, children can critically think about, and therefore take responsibility for, their actions. Allowing the child to be involved in the decision-making process is both caring and respectful. By sharing their ideas and considering acceptable limited choices, children can start to understand different perspectives and strengthen their decision-making skills. Caregivers can use open-ended questions to encourage children to formulate solutions and answers to difficult challenges on their own. Other techniques. Learning from consequences. Natural consequences. Caregivers can explain the connection between a child's behavior and real-life consequences. This is useful when helping children manage their anger and frustration. For example, a child may throw a toy in the air. If the toy breaks, the caregiver can explain that the child is no longer able to use that toy since it is broken. Logical consequences. Logical consequences can be used when a caregiver guides the child to make corrections to their actions in a way that fits their behavior. For example, if a child is throwing things on the floor, the caregiver can direct them to help in picking up these objects. Here, the caregiver shows that a logical consequence of throwing things on the floor is that those items will need to be picked up. Explaining the reasoning behind logical consequences is an important step in helping children understand how the consequence relates to their behaviors. Other techniques. Reorientation or redirection. Adults can support children by offering another activity or a verbal solution to change the child's focus, and to help the child make a positive decision in terms of behavior. The alternative should be related in some way to the original action. For example, if a child is climbing on a table, the caregiver can redirect them to climb on the loft or their play structures instead. Redirection can also be useful when infants do not want to share. Infants do not yet understand why they should share and find doing so an almost impossible task. Redirecting children to another activity or preferred object when quarrels take place may be the only option for this cognitive developmental level. How do children's ages and/or developmental levels influence their behaviors? What children are capable of changes at different ages and developmental levels, so the caregiver's focus should also change somewhat. Regardless of age range and developmental levels, caregivers should be flexible and individualize children's care as much as possible. Caregivers can help children in this process by setting age or developmentally appropriate goals so they can experience small successes and gradually master more complex goals. Here, we discuss a few developmentally appropriate expectations and needs. Newborns do not have control over their behaviors and crying is the primary mode of communication. Caregivers should attempt to identify what the child is trying to communicate and respectfully cater to the child's needs. By 1 year, infants have gained much control over their bodies, and their language skills are developing. However, these children still do not have complete control over their behaviors, impulse control, and self-regulation of emotions. At this age, caregivers should make sure that the child has their needs met, such as being fed and well rested, as hunger or fatigue contributes to dysregulation and an inability to control one's bodies or behaviors. Between 1 and 2 years of age, children still cannot fully control behavior, and often are easily overstimulated. They might also have difficulty understanding and explaining their feelings. Therefore, needs should be met promptly while still allowing the child to explore the world around them. Children ages 3 to 5 start to have more patience and begin to understand rules. Caregivers can help children express anger and frustration properly by communicating needs and wants through words instead of tantrums. Between 5 and 9 years of age, individual temperaments can affect responses and children are learning to manage conflicts with others. Caregivers can support their development by recognizing their temperaments and modeling positive behavior. The importance of self-care for caregivers. Young children often express their needs or emotions through crying or other behaviors that can stress their caregivers. Caregivers must practice self-care and stress management regularly to avoid any sort of impulsive reaction or abuse. Even to infants, caregivers' moods can affect children's behaviors. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance that caregivers first take care of themselves to avoid taking their difficulties and frustration out on the children. Caregivers should be encouraged to turn to their co-teachers or other staff to take over if they are getting too frustrated with a child. Self-care is also important when discussing positive discipline and guidance, as the task of caring for young children is incredibly valuable yet can be quite taxing. Caregivers need to nurture and nourish themselves by having open communication with other adults including their supervisors, expressing feelings about situations and making sure to rest, rejuvenate, and relax.